Welcome, unprofessionals, to another fabulous episode of Unprofessional Development. Today, Mealey and I are going to just list out a whole bunch of podcasts that we really like, and hopefully you'll like too. So, maybe you'll learn a little bit of something. Maybe you'll just be entertained. But either way, show your love. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, click in a certain number of stars. Help us any way you possibly can, and share us around to anybody who also enjoys podcasts and teaching and entertainment and laughter. We love to laugh. This episode is brought to you by Mechanical Pencil Sharpeners. Mechanical Pencil Sharpeners. Sharpen the Amish way. Welcome, unprofessionals, to another exciting episode of Unprofessional Development. I'm Tudiscos.
I'm Mealey. And there ain't nobody else.
And nobody else. It's
just the two of us again.
We can make it if we try.
We can make it if we try. And it's been a while since we've done just the two of us episode. So we've been wanting to do that. I mean, I guess it's kind of been a blessing that we've been able to have so many guests going on.
So popular.
I know.
People love us.
They can't get enough of us. Yes.
That's exactly it.
But I know people do like to hear just the two of us as well. Because in some of our podcasts, I listen back to them oh, we didn't talk very much. Which I mean is...
back and said, yes!
Yeah.
Movie reference! Quote! And then crickets.
Yes.
Which honestly made us sound way smarter.
So, today, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, we know you listen to podcasts because you're listening to this podcast. Some of you, this is the only podcast you listen to. Because, Tudiscos, I'm sure you've had this experience. I have. We've had to introduce people who we were friends with to podcasts. Have you had that experience? How do you podcast? Right. Do I have to pay for this? I've asked more than once, and I'm like, no. How do you do this?
If we could make money doing this, we wouldn't be doing this because other people would be doing it and better at it.
Right. So there's definitely some people that are listening that have not listened to podcasts before or just barely getting into podcasts and said, okay, I'm going to give this one a try since now I know someone that's a podcaster. By the way, how do you feel about that? You know, a podcaster. How good for you.
So we're famous.
We're famous.
We collected data, right? And observed that people were listening to podcasts.
Yes.
And have now found room for growth.
Yes, that's awesome.
Right? We have a growth mindset.
Now, I'm going to date myself again. Tudiscos, do you go back to when David Letterman would have brushes with greatness?
No.
Okay, so he would just have something he would do with his audience members, and they would have brushes with greatness, and then he would kind of go out and talk to them about the time they were waiting in line for a movie, and they happened to see Jerry Seinfeld, or they happen to go to the beach and run into whoever famous person was, and they would just kind of talk about how they...
like, Emilio!
Right. So now, in my demented brain, there are people that are going to, be in some kind of conversation or some situation where they say, do you know anyone famous? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, Chris Tudiscos. He's a podcaster. I work with him.
I remember a time I watched him trip up the stairs. I didn't think it was physically possible, but he would botch that last step every time.
Oh God, don't say that to Disco, because now I've been searching forever and I can't find it. The episode of Saturday Night Live where Martin Short played a character who didn't know how to use stairs, and it is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life, and I've searched YouTube and everywhere for it, and it is just hysterical. So
I love Martin Short so much.
So back to the podcast thing, because we got off on three tangents.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're doing.
So you listen to podcasts. You know two podcasters at least. Some of you know us really well, and some of you live in Saudi Arabia and are listening to us. So crazy. Okay?
Thanks.
Or
Shout
Australia.
Out.
Rock on. Yes.
Shout out to my Arabs.
I don't know what little any Saudi Arabian catchphrases are. So just Australia. Put another shrimp on the Barbie, mate.
Say shukran. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, that's right. Your wife is or fiance is of some Arabian heritage somehow, right?
Syrian, yeah.
Syrian, okay.
Yes, so she tries to tell me things in Arabic, and I don't
know it.
Okay.
It is so difficult.
Yeah, there's a lot. Is it a lot of pronunciations that we don't have in our language? But does she have any Saudi Arabian friends? Is that where our Saudi Arabian people are coming from, or we don't know?
No, she's got some family relatives in Dubai. She's got family relatives in Syria.
Okay, well,
Jordan?
tell her to tell those relatives that we don't have any Jordan or Syrian or Dubai downloads.
That's what we need. We need some Jordanian listeners. That's really what the podcast is missing.
I mean, I assume they have school in Jordan.
Probably better than ours, yeah.
I don't know I don't know what the schooling system is in Jordan, but if you're in Jordan and you're now listening to this, come on the podcast. Tell us what it's like to teach in Jordan.
And you're welcome.
Yes. Okay. So back again to what we're actually supposed to be talking about. Okay.
What are we talking? Are we recording a podcast?
We're recording a podcast.
Day 30 of quarantine. It's going great.
So we want to talk about podcasts that you and I listen to individually. And I think we'll kind of go back and forth, and we each do one back and forth, kind of round robin, and then kind of describe the podcast and why we listen to it and why someone else should listen to it. And
I'm interested too, because I have that English perspective, so I'm always looking for like a good story or a good perspective or something. And I don't really know what you look for in podcasts. Like when you go to look for a podcast, what do you try and listen to?
I listen to so many different things, and I didn't put one down here, but now I've become a complete nerd. I'm also already a complete nerd, but I've become a complete nerd about podcasts.
You got some competition here.
So I listen to podcasts about podcasts. Okay.
Meta.
So it's basically people who have been podcasting for a while telling you how to be a better podcaster and how to make your podcast popular, and
Can we make a podcast about how to make a podcast about how to make a better podcast?
Well, I actually was going to say, I was talking to my family about this. We could do a podcast where we discuss all the podcasts that talk about podcasts and which one of the podcasts about podcasts are good and bad. So that would be good.
I was hanging out with some friends one night, and one of them pitched this great idea. They said, I want to make a podcast where every episode we're just pitching a new podcast.
That's what this is.
And
it's already out there. That's the first on my list. It's called Podcast versus Podcast.
This is a thing?
Yes. Podcast versus Podcast.
I'm fascinated.
So the two guys get on there, and they pitch horrible podcast ideas to each other, and then tear down the other's idea. And then the premise is, we know it's fake, but they say at the end of each episode, we will vote. If we ever are unanimous, then that's what this podcast will be about. So, like, one example in the early episodes is, hey, here's what we'll do. You used to live in the apartment where I live, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in mail, and I'm going to hold it up, and you guess if it's my mail, your mail, or someone else's mail.
Yeah, each episode's at least 2 hours long.
They're really short. They're like 10 minutes. But you can imagine, you and I could do that forever, right? Pitch me your stupid podcast idea right now. Come up with one.
Every week we alternate interviewing each other, and we always come in as different animals.
Nice. There we go.
Yes.
How about...
So you would be a hippo, and I'd be interviewing you about your hippo life.
Sure. How about we go door to door, pre-corona, and we knock on people's doors and ask them for something that there's no possible way that they would have, and pretend that we're their neighbor.
Do you have a cup of plutonium?
Yes. Do you have a valve-covered gasket for a 78 Rambler?
Left-handed monkey wrench?
Yes.
So, what's the name of this podcast that you're talking about?
Podcast versus Podcast. And all these links will be in the show notes that we will put there. It's called Podcast versus Podcast. All right. Wow. So what's first on your list?
I kind of want to go off your... No, I'll stay in my order. Okay. So here's the first one I want to throw out there, because this has helped me just think more about myself. And I feel like it's honestly helped me become like a better, more introspective person. It's called You Are Not So Smart.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's by David McCraney, who I believe in no way has a psychology degree. And It's a really good psychology podcast where basically he brings on experts and they talk about like common logical fallacies.
Ooh.
So common things that people mess up or misunderstand or ways our brains misinterpret information.
Okay. Sunk cost
so-
fallacy is one that I know. I love the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, sunk cost. Can you explain that for the audience?
Sure. That's when you have like been doing something for so long and you should really stop doing it. But like this podcast, you're like, this is a horrible version of the sunk cost fallacy. But when you watch that last horrible season of a show, because you're 6 seasons in, you're like, yeah, but I want to see how it ends. And you're like, but you realize each episode is more and more terrible, and your favorite character has left, but you're like, but I want to finish it. But, and so sometimes it's a car that you keep on putting money into. You're like, well, I just paid for the transmission, so now I'm going to pay for blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no,
Right.
you just need to get rid of the car.
Right. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah,
right?
so it's called I'm Not Smart or I'm Not So Smart.
You are not so smart.
You are not so smart.
So what he does is he'll invite on like a person who's been doing research into that issue or that fallacy, and they'll explain their research and their results, and he'll explain all the implications for our everyday life.
Okay.
So You Are Not So Smart is a really great podcast, and it also has a book of the same title.
Okay. And it's not exactly, but that's tangential to, I don't know if you've ever listened to Freakonomics, where they...
I know of it, but I didn't know it was a podcast. And it was a book.
Oh, it's a fantastic podcast. I used to listen to it a lot. It's not on my list, but that was one of my first podcasts I listened to, and a lot they go into a lot of fallacies
Honorable mention.
Yeah. All right. So come back to me now. It's my turn again.
Number 2.
Yes.
What you got?
So it's called Who's Next Door? All right, which is not an episode from the '80s starring Tony Danza, but anyway. So almost everyone, I'm pretty sure, is familiar with the Nextdoor app. All right?
Yeah.
If you're not, it's an app where you go on and you basically talk to your neighbors about all the stupid stuff that's happening in your neighborhood, or you ask them for suggestions. What's a good Thai restaurant, or who cuts your grass, or did you see those
people
kids?
post if like they lose dogs, or if somebody's like, speeding through the neighborhood.
Yeah. Did you see those kids out at 11 o'clock last night vaping? Who do they belong to, and how can we stop that?
Hooligans and their malarkey.
Right. So this is a podcast, and there's only a few episodes. They go on to certain posts, and then they do an in-depth investigation of that post, and they go to the person who posted it and find out stuff about it and all of that stuff. And I just like the idea. They're centered in Los Angeles. I'm hoping as they go forward that they will reach out into other neighborhoods. And in fact, I've communicated with them on the Twitter. One of my favorite posts that I saw on on the Nextdoor that I go on was, and they posted a picture, and this is great. It was a picture of their bathtub, and there were 3 snakes in it that fell through their ceiling.
Nope. Nope.
And the guy's like, what should I do?
Why did it have to be snakes?
The guy's like, what should I do about this? He's like, my wife is currently at a hotel and will not come back.
Oh yeah, no, you burn down your house and move. That's the devil. That's how paranormal activity starts.
Yeah.
That's an omen.
The end result was, honestly, that it's like, you don't have a snake problem. You have something in your attic that's attracting the snakes, whether it's squirrels or mice or bats or whatever. The snake aren't coming because they
the
fell.
Soul of the unholy. Yeah.
The soul of the unholy. There could be a lot of there's satanic rituals being had in your attic.
If snakes are falling through your ceiling, and then you a week later are found like upside down and inside out, hanging from a roof, people are gonna say you deserved it. Okay, I'm just like, follow the omens, man. No, I watch a lot of horror movies. So.
Yeah. So it's called Who's Next Door, and I suggested they investigate that one, but they just investigate little next door posts, and I just kind of like it. It's it's basically 2 housewives that I guess are on Nextdoor all the time and decided to have a podcast. So go ahead with another one you got there.
All right, so I'll bounce off your ideas and go far away from yours and more towards my concepts.
Okay.
I love horror movies, and in teaching English, I love teaching like Edgar Allan Poe, and I would teach H.P. Lovecraft, but I just hate him as a person.
Okay.
But there's a really amazing podcast called Welcome to Night Vale. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it, and you've mentioned it, and I know that it's popular, and I've never listened to it. So give us the lowdown on it.
So it's weird. I'm not going to say it's a normal podcast. It's a weird one. So if you want normal humans having normal conversations, that's not it. But it's set up like it's a radio broadcast from a town called Night Vale, which is located in like the desert, in like the Midwest or Western U.S. And basically they just kind of report weird things happening around their town, but he does it with like this normal newscaster cadence of, I guess there's a cloud and it's raining dead bodies. And so it's just weird.
Comedy or not?
It's kind of like a dark, twisted sort of, it's not horrific. Like it's not a really scary thing, but it's basically like horror adjacent. I guess that's how I'll describe it.
All right. So, and they kind of like, I'm going way back, way before both of our times. So like with the, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds concept, except this is a podcast, and it keeps on going as opposed to just one episode.
Very similar, yeah. And they just report like weird and there's always something weird, supernatural happening around the town. But yeah, with that sort of.
Is there more than one character? They have like people out in the field that they're interviewing and people or is it just like the one guy or gal doing it?
The standard podcast is just the one guy giving the broadcasts and sort of like reporting back from people, but they'll occasionally check in with people, and there's also another town next to theirs, but that's a whole story arc. It's interesting. It's a very interesting one that I listen to whenever Halloween's rolling around. Okay.
So I'm going to skip down to my last one that I have listed then, because it's kind of, if you like that, you might like this. And there's a coworker of ours that I turned on to this podcast, and he loved it. I liked it. He loved it. He went bananas on it. So if he's listening, he knows who I'm talking about. But it's called Hello from the Magic Tavern. It's much sillier than Night Vale. And
yes.
So the basic premise is this guy's name is Arnie. He has somehow gone through a magic portal behind a Burger King. I don't know why he picked Burger King. And now he's in this magic land of Foon, I think it's called. And he's at this tavern, and somehow when he went through the thing, he brought podcasting equipment, because when you go through a portal, who doesn't bring their podcasting equipment? Mm-hmm. And he's somehow able to get these signals back through the portal back to Wi-Fi somehow, but he can't get back himself. And anyway, he sits around and interviews. He's got two friends that are with him. One is a wizard who is completely crazy and wants to fight the Dark Lord. And then there is a...
it's some kind of, like a gopher?
Or badger or something like that. Right. I don't know. Like but anyway, he's some kind of animal, and he's a shapeshifter, and the magician can barely do any magic at all. And it's based, but it essentially is three improv comics that are sitting around doing this, and then they have guests as well that might be a fairy or a princess or some other kind of magical, an ogre or whatever kind of mythical
fantasy archetype character,
right? Yeah. That they have on there, and they just basically, but the whole thing is improv as they're going along, and it is not safe for work. Do not have your children listen to this because it gets kind of explicit, but it is really, really funny. And they just, one of the things people tell us when we get feedback about this podcast is that they like the back and forth between me and Tudisco. And this, if you like that, this podcast has a whole lot of that, where they just continually crack each other up and one up each other and all that kind of stuff. They yes and Tudisco. They yes and.
Yes and. Right? Accept everything.
Yes. Oh. Alrighty. What you got?
All right. Now, number 3. For me, I'm going to change sort of things entirely. So this is, they've gone through a name change. It used to be called Foodstuffs, and now it's called Savor. Oh. So it's, I think a mark of a good podcast is if they take something that shouldn't be interesting, but like they're passionate enough that it gets you interested in it. Yeah. So it's these two female hosts, Annie Reese and Lauren Vogelbaum, and they have just really great rapport with one another. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they basically just choose one piece of food and just talk about it. And so what they'll do is like they'll give you like a full history of this and like how it's affected people and different things about its creation. And it sounds so boring. And if you sit down and listen to it, they are so into it.
So it's a finished product, or is it an ingredient, or is it both? Like, would they just go...
So maybe they'll do
not just
it on
green pepper. Like, could they go off on green pepper, or would it be like stuffed green peppers? Or both?
Either.
Okay.
Yeah, both. So like they might do one on martinis, right? Or they might do one on, salt. Or they could do one on chocolate eclairs. Like, they have a whole range of stuff, and it's interesting stuff. Like, they'll give you this historical background for these things. You had no concept. Like, oh, I didn't know this food caused a war in France in the 1700s. And it's really engaging, and they're just very sweet and genuine. And that is one that's actually family friendly. So when I'm on road trips with the boy. Nice. We'll put on Savor, and we'll learn some things about chewing gum.
And does he like it?
Yeah, I mean, he tolerates it. He doesn't have patience for anything.
Okay, I was gonna say, does he like it or tolerate it? Because
we'll give him a brand new video game that cost $1 billion to make, and he'll get bored in 5 minutes.
Okay,
kids.
Well, I was gonna say, and this isn't on my list either, but just a suggestion to you. Your son is how old?
He is 9.
Okay, are you familiar with Mars Patel?
No.
Okay, so write that down. You're going to want to get to that. Okay.
Mars Patel.
So it is speaking of like a radio drama with sound effects and all this kind of stuff. And it's like kids and they go on this adventure and there's like a mystery. Almost think like Stranger Things, except there's this like school and then they end up going into outer space and all this kind of stuff. But there's lots of neat little... like old school radio drama, the door creaking open and the thing slamming and other stuff like that gives it that like old school radio drama feel. So that's one, but that's not one of my 5. But like I've listened to it with my daughter.
Honorable mention. Yeah, he likes a show called Nick Munter Monster Hunter, and there's only like 3 episodes, so we'll end up listening to them on loop.
Oh God!
Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible.
It's a cute production.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Mars Patel, you'll really like that. Okay, so kind of in our theme of we've kind of been going with a little bit here is the camaraderie and the chemistry. There's a show called The Spitballers, which I know I had you listen to way on back and said this is like the kind of energy we want for our podcast. And so the way I explain it to people is it's as if the Impractical Jokers had a podcast, and if you don't know who the Impractical Jokers are, I am sorry, because you need to find out who the Impractical Jokers are, because I remember when I turned somebody on to them one time, and they texted me, like, hours later, and they said, I'm literally, like, in pain, and my eyes are, like, just tears streaming from, I've been binging on Impractical Jokers, because they'd never heard of it before. But they're hysterical. So basically, the Impractical Jokers and the Spitballers is the podcast, which it's not the same people, but it's 3 idiots that make each other do and say stupid stuff, essentially. And so the Spitballers, they're a little more organized and segmented. They have like just different segments, but they do a lot of would you rather things, and they come up with different scenarios, but then they just riff on that, and they're just silly, and it's a lot of fart jokes. They pretty much has a fart or poop joke every episode, and then they're also host of a fantasy football podcast that I used to listen to a ton. And so they do a draft at the end of each episode. So there's 3 of them, and they're like, we're going to be in a grocery store, and it's going to be a battle royale where we're going to be like out to like kill each other, and you can draft anything that you might want to have in the grocery store, and we're going to go 4 rounds as to what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. And it's, okay, I'll take a pineapple because it's got the spikes and all this kind of stuff, and I'll take this because I can, some soy sauce and throw it in your eye or whatever. Like, but the Spitballers are really, really hysterical. There's probably about like 100 episodes, and that's one you can listen to with your kid as well. My kids love listening to that, and we get a kick out of that.
All right, round 4.
Yes.
For all my John Green fans out there, He's the guy who wrote Fault in Our Stars.
Okay. Now, I know Red Green, who used to have a PBS show that's really bizarre from back in the day. Do you know Red Green?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm aware of the Crayola color.
Yes. Red Green is another really thing that you like when you watch it and you go, is this really, like, did someone actually make this? Is this how did they ever, like, get more than one episode of this? Because this is just for really sick in the head people. So
I have that thought more than I should.
Yes. Okay, so tell us, John Green, Fault in Our Stars. Okay.
So John Green, yeah, he's an author, an educator, and he also runs Crash Course, the YouTube channel. But he started up a really interesting podcast called the Anthropocene Reviewed.
Wow, that's a big word,
right?
I hear anthropology in there, but I don't understand what the second half of that word means.
It's just anything in, like, the world of humans is kind of and so everything, essentially.
Okay.
And so what he does is he will just choose random things in the world, and he will describe them and sort of explain his relationship to them. But he does it in a very literary, artistic way.
Okay. It's a solo podcast, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the episodes are all pretty short.
Okay.
So usually he'll review 2 things an episode, but it could be anything. So he reviewed Canadian geese.
Well, I hate them.
On a 5-star scale. And
did he hate them? I hope he hated them. If he doesn't hate them, then I don't want to listen to the podcast, by the way.
He is not a fan of Canadian geese.
They're just like, they're like pigeons on steroids, basically.
So, yeah, he just takes these weird things, but, like, it kind of just leads into these strange tangents and these really interesting tales. And he says, I like the way that he writes. And if you don't listen to this. But, yeah, he just has a very artistic, poetic way of describing things and sort of encapsulating things. So for any of my fans of literature or figurative language out there, Anthropocene Reviewed is really entertaining.
Okay, cool. By the way, I still think this would be a good senior prank, even though, like, I know that there's a nasty aspect to it. I think I told you this, didn't I?
I hope not.
Yeah.
Go on.
Just all you need is to have geese that are somewhere near the campus of your high school, if you're a high school senior, and a loaf of bread. And you just breadcrumb the geese into the main gathering area of your high school, whatever that's called. In your high school, at ours, it's called the mall, but I'm sure it has various names.
Yeah, the quad and the courtyard and whatever
it is, and get, like, a good 5-6 geese in there with hundreds of students. So I think that would be really funny. But then someone pointed out to me, one of the main reasons we hate geese is because they leave their goose grease, as we call it. That's what they're everywhere.
That's the most southern way to say it I've ever heard.
Yeah. Don't step in the goose grease. They used to have it on when I played, like, we talked golfing with my brother. When I played golf, there was a little not miniature golf, but like a little par 3 golf course that we would go to, and they had a lot of geese, and you constantly had to avoid the goose grease. I think my mom came up with that term, or someone gave it to her, and she shared it with us. So I've got one left. Do you have one left?
I got one left.
Okay,
Round 5.
Okay, so I'm going to do the one that I've got left, and it's called Reply All. Do you know this podcast?
No.
Okay, so Reply All, obviously, which to me is just a brilliant name, because as soon as you hear Reply All, so many thoughts, oh, that's so stupid, and da-da-da-da. And so basically they talk about various internet issues, and they just investigate different things that are just quirks of the internet. And there's 2 people, and sometimes they have other people that they interview and they bring in, and all this stuff. And it's really hard to explain because the episodes are so different, but it's really good, and it's really entertaining, and there's a lot of chemistry between them. Like, they're laughing all the time at each other and cracking each other up. So and there's a million episodes of that as well. I highly recommend Reply All. So what's your last one?
Reply All. All right, so my last one, I'm going to just list out a bunch of words Mealey doesn't know. So this is produced by Rocket Jump, who's the group that's responsible for 5-second films and Video Game High School on YouTube.
Yep, not have idea what any of that refers to.
No. Very few people do, so don't feel bad. But so they started up a podcast. They have a couple, but they started one I love, and it's called Story Break.
Okay.
So here's what they do. They're a group of writers and comedians.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I want to say, 3 of them in this group on this podcast. And what they do is basically they walk in with a pitch for a movie that shouldn't work. Like they walk in and say, guys, I think the first episode is Legend of Zelda. Guys, we're going to make a Legend of Zelda movie. Mm-hmm. And basically what they do is throughout the course of the podcast, they just keep spitballing until they have a finished product of what would a decent watchable movie look like of that style. So they did one that was putting together all of the Kellogg's characters.
Nice.
So Freddie Wong on the show came on and went, guys, we've been hired by Kellogg's, and so we have to put together their mascots Avengers style in one giant movie. So
I want to see that movie. I really want to see that movie. Yes.
And so it's interesting to see their processes. And like, you know, there's times when like there's lulls, like it's kind of breaking down and they're running into roadblocks, but they keep working their way through them. And that's something that I've always found fascinating. I love stories, you know, and so it's interesting seeing them go from here's the thing to, okay, how do we get it to a final story? And it also makes you think about, you know, movies and scripts and things too, because they're like, all right, so what's going to be our act 3? Where's our act 4? And what's our conflict and what's our character motivation? And it's a like really interesting one.
It's like the opposite of the podcast. Maybe you know this one as well, called How Did This Get Made? Have you heard that one?
I do know How Did This Get Made.
Okay. So it's kind of like the flip-flop of that. And How Did This Get Made, for those of you that are wondering what's that? It's basically 2 to 4 people that watch a really horrible movie, and then they talk about it and they discuss all the plot holes and the things that make absolutely no sense, and why anyone thought that this would be a good idea when they were making the movie. And there's kind of like
that much money into Battlefield Earth, you'd think something good would come out.
Right. Yeah. So we've covered our 5 podcasts and 6 or 7 more.
Yes, our 15 top 10 podcasts.
Yes. The show notes will be like a mile long. But first of all, like, again, we appreciate you guys. We appreciate, you know, all our new Jordanian listeners and people in Uzbekistan and Chile and Siberia, and all of you that all of you have been doing whatever bootlegging Wi-Fi so that we can get inside of China. I'm sure that's happening.
I'm 1,000. We don't have the data for it, but I feel it in my.
Yes, and for those of you that have taken drones and recording of our podcast and launched them into space, that's been appreciated.
Discovered by alien civilizations.
Yes, and also those of you put MP3 players and put them in time capsules and buried it so people can hear this a long time from now.
I put it on my Zoom.
You know, which, by the way, at that pitch meeting. So I was like, yeah, I've got this new product idea. It's called Zune. Oh, Zoom? That sounds like I like that name, Zoom. No, it's Zune. What? What'd you say? I said Zune. You mean Zoom, don't you? Like, why are we calling it Zune? No one says that.
Tune with a Z.
Oh, God. Is that what the guy at the pitch meeting said?
Sure.
Tune with a Z. Yeah. Oh, that's horrible.
Yes, and.
Yeah. Yes, and our stock is going down the toilet. Sorry.
This was supposed to be a thank you.
Oh, that's right.
You can't even be appreciative without getting off on useless tangents.
Oh, yes. You brought it up, young man. I was thanking people for doing all wonderful things, and then you had to bring up the Zune, which
unprofessional development, time of death 305.
Yes.
But thank you guys so much for dealing with us and indulging.
Yes.
All of our vices, really.
Awesome. And please do reach out to us in all the ways that will be also in the show notes at the bottom of all these podcast links. And thank you, and stay unprofessional.
And that's it. That's all we got for you today. Thank you so much for listening. If any of those shows caught your fancy and you're a little interested, you want to check any of them out, just check our show notes. We've listed all the links for you to make this nice and convenient. Thank you all so much. Like, subscribe, share around, tell everybody, and stay unprofessional.